Plus 美国成长路上的 GPS， 欢迎大家来到第215期微课堂。我们每周为大家带来分享。从2016年3月开始，风雨无阻，从不间断。在过去的214期微课堂中，已经有名校招生官、就业指导中心负责人在美家长以及学生奉献了他们精彩的分享。希望可以用这些在美学习、工作、生活、发展等真实案例，为大家带来更多的真知灼见，走出误区。如果您在收听我们微课堂的过程中有任何问题，欢迎您及时私信我们的倪梦石老师，倪老师会竭力回答您的疑问。谢谢您的支持。All right, welcome again. Like for our Zoom audience, if you have any questions during the seminar, you may leave your questions in the Zoom chat box. We will have the Q&A section after this seminar. Today, for our seminar, we will talk about the strategy adjustment for the college application under the COVID-19. And also, let me introduce like Harmony Plus a little bit. Like Harmony Plus is the official partnership with the leading university and institution in the United States, such as UC Berkeley, Stanford International Research Institute, and San Jose State. We are committed to provide top-notch programs to the outstanding local and international students. And also for our programs, we have the unique, like high quality online academic programs, and also soft skills programs, and also professor research programs. For our academic programs, we have the reading, nonfiction reading and writing, test prep like SAT and ACT, college writing, and also for our soft skills programs, we have the Future Entrepreneur Challenge, public speaking. And also for our professor research program, we have the data strategy summer research program working with UC Berkeley's professor. And also we have the KIGO competition training programs. We have the like the advanced and senior. You can get a rank and a medal after this like KIGO competition. And also we have our college counseling like future planning. We already help lots of students to get their offers beyond their expectation, and also they already study in their dream schools. And for the Harmony Plus, we have the unique hybrid learning platform. It's like online and offline, schools and students, theory and practice, and also education and services. Harmony Plus working as a group to help the students and family. So today, let me like introduce our guest speaker a little bit. I think most of our audience is really familiar with our guest speaker, Miss Lynea. She is our like senior educational coach in Harmony Plus, and also get a bachelor degree from Yale University and master degree from UCLA and San Jose State. She already over like 15 years experience for the college prep counseling and writing instruction. She helps students to apply undergraduate and graduate programs, and also to help them to get their dream schools, such as like Harvard, Stanford, Yale, like Cornell, Columbia, UC Berkeley, Brown, and NYU. She has extensive experience working with students and families within the competitive like Bay Area environment. Because of this like unique situation for this year, that's why we invite like our guest speaker Lynea to give us some like tips or strategy about how we can do better for our like application in the upcoming fall. Hi, let's welcome Lynea. Hi, Lynea.
Hi, Becky. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, wonderful. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today with everybody. There is so much uncertainty happening for everybody with all of the changes because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so our goal today is to give you an overview of how the COVID-19 situation has impacted university admissions overall. That's the first point here. We're going to also talk about some key factors in college admissions that are general, which have always been there and will continue to be here for this upcoming season. We'll also talk about the test optional policies. There have been significant changes and still even some uncertainty around the SAT and the ACT and the requirements for testing for the upcoming admission season. So we will talk about understanding those test optional policies and the impacts they can have for you, whether you are a parent or a student, you're planning, or if you're taking the tests yourself. We'll then talk about strategy adjustments for the best admissions outcomes, things that we are encouraging all of our students to really consider going forward with over the next couple of months, over the summer, and through the next year, keeping in mind everything that we are certain of and the things that are dynamic and still changing. And then we will lastly talk about some unique situations and choices that are specific to the COVID-19 situation, just to make you aware of for your own information and to give you some insight into how admissions offices are thinking when they make the changes that we're seeing happening now. So that's what we're going to do today. All right, so just to dive right in here, it's obvious. It's obvious to any of you who are juniors in high school or to parents who are preparing juniors for this upcoming year that COVID-19 has dramatically changed the admission situation. There are some really clear impacts. First of all, it's having an impact on second semester grades from junior year. Many schools have gone from a grading system to pass, no pass. It really depends on the individual school, but some schools are also going to pass, no pass, and then saying that the students can optionally choose to select grades so that they have them. Other schools are freezing grades where they were when the school closed down, and that's the grade that the student has. So in any case, depends on what school you're attending. There are some impacts on the junior year, second semester, and this is particularly meaningful because traditionally, junior year is the it year for college admissions. The junior, the 11th grader, spends a lot of time working really hard in first semester and then putting a lot of pressure on themselves and expectations that second semester is going to matter as well, and hoping to have a fabulous junior year with good grades and all of the things that they intend to showcase for the college admissions process. And now we have a lot of students who are feeling like, wow, you know, I have been planning for this. I was doing all of these activities. I was working really hard on my grades, and now all of a sudden it's gone. So we just want to put in perspective what that really means. Your grades are not actually gone. You are ultimately going to be assessed with your peers going into the admissions process. And what that means is that whatever is happening at your school for you is happening for everybody else in your class, in your application class. And every school receives information about the policies and the situation for a particular school. And you will ultimately be assessed in admissions relative to your peers at your particular program. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are a lot of changes, but anything that's happening to you in terms of how your grades are going to be regarded is happening to everybody else from your school, and the college admissions officers will know that. The next point here is about the impact on standardized testing arrangements. Testing dates have been canceled through June. It is not certain whether or not we will have SAT dates, for instance, or ACT dates starting later in the summer. We don't know. And when they do reopen, it's not really clear how often the tests will be offered. So just things to consider here. It's not a time to back away from test prep planning. If you still have to take your SAT or ACT, then it's time to consider that you will simply be delaying perhaps your test if you were planning on having one this spring or in summer, or even perhaps in August. We don't know when the next one will be. But to basically keep plugging along and planning to prepare for those tests. The other thing, just in terms of the SAT and the ACT, is that some of the conversations among admissions counselors and admissions offices is that number one is this: we can expect that testing will reopen when schools reopen. So when there's a firm sense that, oh, the schools are reopening, then the tests will essentially be viewed as safe for reopening, and that's kind of how it will follow. So they will not be opening tests in certain areas of the country and where some people can take the test and others can't. So it's going to be consistent. But that's just something to keep in mind, that if there are major markets, let's say New York City can't test yet, or Los Angeles can't test yet, or San Francisco can't test yet, you can probably bet that we're not, or Texas, certain areas in Texas, you can probably bet that it won't be until it feels like there is a critical mass of students who can go back to do live testing for testing to occur in a secure and safe manner. Right now, the outlook is looking at August. No one is really entirely sure. And then the last thing to remember about this is that normally many students, juniors, will take their tests in, say, May or June. They have a score. If they want to improve it, they then say, I'm going to do an August test, or I'll do an October or November, and that they keep kind of testing and planning for that. What I think is maybe safest to assume is that there might be limited testing opportunities. We don't know if they're going to just have traditional testing schedule because that's what they can arrange in the fall, or if they're going to, say, double up or triple the number of test dates. I think it's the safest bet and most conservative bet, it might not turn out to be accurate, to assume that you will have fewer testing opportunities. So all students should aim to prepare very well and to have whatever fall test that they have be the best that they can do it. Maybe they'll have a chance to take it again, but I wouldn't count on having multiple iterations of your test to just keep popping up those scores, which is something people often do. That's one thing to be aware of. All of you probably know, if you're doing AP tests, that those have already been impacted. They've been shortened, changed dramatically. It's not yet clear how individual colleges will assess the AP score. I think in general, what I have heard actual admissions officers say is that the recognition of having completed the course is important. So students will actually have perhaps their pass, no pass grade in that class, but the student who actually takes the time to go and take the AP test, even if the AP test score at this point might be a little bit, let's say, not have the same weight or value that it's had in the past, because they're now being done at home and they're so short. But that the initiative that the student took to bother to take the exam is also something that's going to be regarded. It shows a level of follow through. So at this point, most of you should have already registered for APs because they're coming up in the next 2 weeks. But I just want to say, for those of you who are doing it, that's a good thing. Even if you feel like, oh, what is this going to count for? Just the initiative of following through on those exams is something that admissions will look favorably on. Then we have an impact on extracurricular opportunities. After school activities gone, team sports gone, individual sports gone. A lot of the summer plans that people had are now gone or dramatically changed. So admissions officers recognize that as well. And so here we're going to talk a little bit more later into the presentation about transforming those opportunities into things you can do during shelter in place, things that you can do online, things that might be even different that you might not have thought of before. So there's a significant impact there, but there are some options. And then of course, there's the impact on the overall application process. Many of you might have questions about, well, how are admissions offices going to assess my student now, or assess me at this point with all of these changed? They're still figuring it out themselves, right? And so we'll talk about some of the thoughts that are coming into their minds, what everybody, I think, wants. And it seems that if you look at the messaging coming out of universities across the country, is a great deal of empathy, a great deal of compassion, and a great deal of awareness that when schools are shut down, access to resources and guidance and even preparation for tests and just educational follow through are absent, and that it's hard for students across all demographics to do all of this stuff at home, in a single, with their computer by themselves and distanced from everybody else. It's not impossible, but they recognize that home self-guided education or interactive with the school is going to vary. Some schools can do it well. Some households don't have the computers to have, let's say, siblings all going to school at the same time. It can create some challenges. So in any case, there's an overall impact on how admissions has to consider the situation for this class. This incoming, the next years of applicants are going to have a special situation, and hopefully it will not continue after that. But it's impacting everyone. So with that in mind, you want to adjust your application strategy accordingly and really consider your individual circumstances as you approach all of this. So we want to talk about some key factors that play into admissions decisions for first-time freshmen, and these are things that matter in general. So we would have been saying the same exact thing to you if it weren't for even if prior to the shutdowns. We just want to look at the top here. So this is a survey. This is survey information from the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. This data is, I think, as recent as 2019. It's an assessment of 2018 to 2019. And that N in the second column is the number of survey respondents. It's survey data. So what we have at the top, what we just want, we're just going to focus on the first couple of rows. Grades in all courses, grades in college prep courses, strength of curriculum, admission test scores, the SAT, ACT, and let's say essay or writing sample. These are things that most students are thinking about when they apply to school. The respondents in general, we just have most respondents basically had a response. So that's we have 220 for most of those. Now, the things that they rated as highly important, let's say 74.5% for grades in all courses and 73.2% grades in college prep courses. Basically, grades matter, okay? It's the dominant thing. The grades are really where it's at. So students want to really be focusing on that GPA and, of course, prepare to do well in the fall. Do your best with whatever you have happening with your classes as they are now, and also really prepare to do well in the fall. So grades matter. That's always the case. You see it drops to 15%, said it was only moderately important, which basically means the vast majority of programs you're going to apply to, it's going to be pretty important. This is followed by strength of curriculum. And what strength of curriculum means is that is a student taking rigorous college prep courses, a student that is taking, let's say, honors courses, or students who are taking AP courses, courses that are more heavily weighted. If that curriculum, the more rigorous the curriculum is relative to the student's skills, that's looked favorably. So in the sense that often admissions wants to see that a student is not necessarily taking the easiest classes they can and then having a perfect GPA. If there's a sense that the student could be challenging themselves more and the school offers courses that could challenge that student more, the admissions office would like to see the students working basically in a growth mode so that they're challenging themselves. So more challenging curricula are advised. You don't want to make the exchange of taking courses that are so hard that they start really impacting GPA. So there's always a balance that students are looking for. But strength of curricula is also important. At 62.1% is considerable importance. Then it drops down a little bit to 45.7%, say that admissions test scores matter, are of considerable importance. That is 2018-2019 data. So let's just keep in mind that even the 2019-2020 data that they're going to publish eventually is probably going to have dropped because there is a trend in basically de-emphasizing test scores across the country. More and more competitive schools are leaving test scores behind or making them optional. So I would expect that number to be even lower at this point. And going into this next season, because of the shutdown around tests, because of I mean, that's really basically it, because of limited access across all populations, demographics in the country to make sure this test, which is supposed to be standardized, is relatively fair. They can't control so much for that, so they will be moving even more away from considerable importance here. So that number for test scores for this upcoming season particularly will be lower. Then essays or writing samples, that drops from 45% down to 23%. So still important. What's interesting, if you look horizontally with the essay and writing sample, you have a 23.2%, 33 says it's of moderate importance, limited importance, or no importance. Basically, what that tells you is if you have things like some saying it's really important, some say it's only moderately, some say it's limited, and some say it's not, and there's a distribution that's kind of even across that, it really is going to depend on the school. That's what that tells you, is that some schools are just saying, yes, it matters, some schools saying it's no matter at all, okay? So really, you'll have a sense based on your college list about what kinds of schools really want those essays. The more competitive it is, the more writing they want, the more important it is. Certain schools, the Cal State University system, generally no essays. So of course, it's of no importance to them. So, and plenty of schools have no essays, and then lots of schools ask for extra essays. So that really becomes particular to your individual situation. So for some of you with your profiles, you will want to have really dynamic essays. Some of you may say, you know what, I'm applying to all of 2 schools that really require extra essays. That's what I'm aiming for. That's what you're supposed to be aware of. In any case, the takeaway here is that across the board, offices are identifying grades, the strength of the curricula, and test scores, which is now getting replaced a little bit as top factors for first-time freshmen. That's always been the case. The tests, a little more wiggle room now.
Yes, so we already know there are like some factors gone in fact or like applications. So is there any difference between the public schools and the private schools when they see all the like applications?
So there are definitely some differences between public and private schools. We have this particular set of pie charts here. And this is really big picture information. This is not like like hard scientific data about the difference between public and private schools, but we just want to illustrate a point here. First of all, you have essays, GPA, test scores, and activities. And under both categories, they matter. So in high school, everything that you're doing matters. And I want to say activities isn't just like clubs, volunteer work. Activities include work, jobs. If you say you're too busy and you're taking care of a little sibling, okay, that's an activity, but you have to recognize it as an activity. So activities are basically the range of things that you would identify to admissions as meaningful ways that you spend your time that actually are developing your character and helping you mature. So both public schools and private schools will emphasize all of them. As you can see, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private, GPA is a big deal, right? Grades, 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 okay? When we start seeing grades, a student who has decent grades and occasional poor marks, we then start having to think of how do we make up for that in some other area of the application, okay? That's the thinking. Oh, somebody has a couple of grades that don't look good. Now we have to figure out how to make up for that. Is there a summer course they can take? Is there an activity they can do? Can they make sure they get an A somewhere else to show that they really have that covered? We tend not to have to think about that if someone says, oh, they didn't do volunteer work that summer, right? We don't spend a lot of time trying to make up for that. And by the time the essays come around, the essays just go in the applications. We're not trying to make up for a bad essay, right? But it's the grades that when there's a problem, we have to kind of like, oh, how do we figure that out? So for everybody, grades are important. That should be obvious at this point. Test scores traditionally have had a little bit more of an impact on public schools, especially giant systems like the University of California, or let's say University of Texas, Austin, places where the public funding for the schools might be involved, where even some policy and public politics are involved, that basically have put demands on the schools to have really quantitative data and numbers to justify admissions. And how do you quantify a 16, 17-year-old applicant to college, right? It's a human being with all of these things and experiences, but the way we quantify it is with grades, and we quantify it with test scores. Even if the essays and the activities, let's say specifically the activities, provide a wonderful portrait or sense of the student's character, they can't put a number on that as readily. I mean, they have ways of assessing it, but they can't put a number on it as readily. And that's why these larger systems have typically, traditionally emphasized these items a little bit more. So you can say, okay, this person has this GPA and they've had these test scores, and have a little bit more predictability about their admissions to the different UCs based on those numbers and what that looks like. Whereas with the private schools, you might have really top numbers, but not a lot of these other dynamic things about activities, or really being able to articulate who you are. And you could have the best things in the world and not get into some of the top schools because the student didn't demonstrate these other qualities that are actually unquantifiable, but can be assessed, right? So those are the differences. Again, not all public schools act like this. Many public schools act like private schools. And the other thing, as I said right now, the test scores, is that little pie for test score under public is going to get diminished significantly this year just because of the situation. So you still have to take them, but we have to keep them in perspective.
All right, thank you, Lynea. So we already know we have lots of factors we need to consider when we do the applications. So is there any key factors can impact our applications?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to what I've kind of said. And I think this is just more, actually, let's just say data that really emphasizes it. If you look at the two rows that are circled, from 2007, grades in all courses were 52% of considerable importance, meaning people, colleges weighted that at 52%. That has shot up to 75% in 2018. So that means that over a decade, a little more than a decade, all grades have become more important. Now, just so you can see that, the top row is grades in college prep, which has gone from 80% to 73. It's diminished slightly. And then you have grades in all courses, which has gone from 52 to 75. What that really means is that they're not making as clear a distinction between college prep classes and other classes. So, for example, a PE class may not necessarily be, might be counted depending on how the school assesses things, but may not be considered quote unquote college prep. right? But they may now like holistically be looking at the GPA overall, which encompasses everything. So the point is we're focusing just grades in all courses. We don't want students to think that some classes matter more than others. You know, if you get a D in gym, it's not going to help you. And then you have admissions test scores. That trend we have in 2007, they were about 59%. It's dropped to 46. Again, it's certainly even lower now. So test scores have just become less important, just showing you that the trends have been, that these are long-term trends. And I would say that grades are probably maybe stabilized. I don't really know what this last year will be. You know, you can assume probably 80%, and that test scores, that's probably dropped.
Yes, and you already mentioned lots of times about the test optional and test like flexible. Would you please give us some like general idea about this too? Because sometimes students really confused about like test like optional and test flexible.
So I'll give you some definitions about that in just a second. Let me just give you the overview of the current situation here. So the current testing policy. So as I've said, more and more schools are de-emphasizing SAT and ACT scores with test optional and test flexible policies. Many colleges are not requiring scores for fall 2021 applicants. Just because they're not doing it for this coming fall doesn't mean they won't return to it the following year. But right now, many colleges are not requiring them. Now, here are some highly ranked test optional or test flexible schools. This is fairly up to date. There is a website called fairtest.org, which is actually it's a nonprofit organization, and you could, what's the word? It's a they have an agenda specifically that they actually don't believe. They're not strongly favoring of tests. They actually think that testing creates inequities. But what's, you know, whether or not you agree with that or not is not really the point. They're useful because they track very up-to-date, pretty regularly schools that have become test optional, test flexible, or test blind. Their updates are right on it. They're tracking it. And part of it is they're pushing schools in that direction. So this is from their very recent information. And these are some of the schools that now have no longer just flatly require the scores, but have some flexibility. Amherst, American University, Boston University, Brandeis University, Cornell, NYU, Pomona, Santa Clara University, University of Chicago, Wesleyan, and Williams College. So a couple of these have been on the list for more than a year or so. Williams, I think, is a brand new one. Highly competitive liberal arts college. So just Cornell has also changed things recently. So this is, the point is that testing is not necessarily the gatekeeper for this upcoming season that it has been in the past. Now let's talk about like being a little clearer about what test optional and test flexible mean. So if we can go to the next slide, we have three things to look at. So not requiring the test does not mean that they're not considering it, okay? They're saying you don't have to have it to apply. And many of them are saying, but you can still send it to us. We'll take a look, why not, right? So just keep that in mind that if you are a good test taker, it would behoove you to take the test so that you can have those nice scores to send along with things. That it becomes considered as a part of the whole application. And they're also saying is that if you don't submit them, we're not going to hold it against you is the point, right? So they're still, it's not like they go, oh, has test, has no test, the person with the test is automatically better. That's not the point. They're looking at the whole picture of the person and saying, what can we assess from that? If the test is not there and they're not considering them, I mean, and that they're just looking at that person with what they've got, right? But if you can put in a nice, really shiny, fabulous test, then that becomes one of the points that they can consider for you. And that's a positive thing. So not requiring does not mean that it's not being considered. If you have great test scores or you plan to take the test, for test optional schools, they are not required, but you have the option to submit them. If it will support your application, you should submit them. That's really what it comes down to. And if you happen to go to a school where the majority of the seniors you're competing with who are in your class and your peers, and I'll just be blunt, and your socioeconomic background, meaning like there isn't like a gap where some people can afford test prep and you can't, things like that. If you're on the same sort of wavelength of access to training, to prep, and your peers are taking these tests, then you might want to take the tests, even if it's test optional, unless you know that your score is going to be like a diminishment of your application, because you're going to be judged against your peer group and your socioeconomic group and your geographic group. So you want to have your what you have to match the competitive profile of the people coming right out of your school. Okay, So that is important. Now we have test flexible. What this means is that they are interested in testing, right? But they don't say to the student, you have to send us the SAT or the ACT general test. They might say, if you send us AP information or subject tests, that we'll take different scores and we'll consider it in the whole of it, but we're not just stringent about these particular things and everybody has to have the same thing. So you look at the particular school and you kind of get a sense of what sorts of tests they will consider and look at. But you aren't like, don't have to sit for the general SAT or ACT necessarily. Then you have test blind, which means that the scores are not considered at all. If you send them, it's just simply not going to be part of your profile. Like, and they're not interested, and that's not how it's going to be dealt with. So test blind means that they do not use the scores in determining, even if you sent the stuff, it's no one's score gets determined. Okay, so there are a range of schools, and you can take a look at the different, policies of the schools, and know that over the summer there will probably be more schools becoming test optional. They might still be deciding whether or not to go there or what to do right now, and a lot of that might have to do with what the College Board does in terms of actually opening up testing. So then we have other things here, like colleges are offering different policies and considerations. So these are things. Some schools waiving test score requirements entirely. Some are waiving requirements for students above a certain GPA. So they want test scores from some, but not from others. Waiving only SAT subject test scores. They may do it where they're doing some things for international students and some things for domestic students, right? Or even country. We don't know exactly how they'll do it. And then also they're considering geographic and equity issues around testing, meaning, again, certain places that are highly impacted in the United States. If you're in New York City, and say they do open test dates again in August, it may be that families and students do not feel as secure in a highly impacted area like New York taking their kids to take tests. So they might say, well, students coming out of these high schools there, we're not as, we're more lenient in our consideration of the test, or we've decided we're not going to concern ourselves. But if somebody is coming out of Montana where there's been one case of COVID-19 and there's no reason for the students locally to, and schools and shops and everything are open, then the expectation that a student could get to a test without the impacts of the pandemic impeding them would be like, well, a student coming out of this high school should have probably have taken the test, things like that. So those are things that they're starting to talk about how they're going to work with. So next point is, it's very important to check the policy at every single school. As I said earlier, expect testing to reopen when schools reopen. That's the best predictor we've got. That remember that there will be fewer opportunities probably for students to retest to improve your scores. So when you go there, make it a good one if you can. You might get in there again, but you might not. We don't know. They might prioritize different things in terms of actually getting people into those exam rooms. So we don't know. And then choose a testing strategy based on your academic profile. If you're a great tester, do what you can to get those tests in there. If you're a poor tester, do what you can to get the test you need, but maybe you want to like focus a lot of energy elsewhere if getting a good test in is going to be hard for you.
Yes, thanks for sharing all the detailed information about the test, how the student can choose, how we can face this unique situation for this year. And also, is there any university you can give us some example about their test optional or like others like policies adjustments?
Sure. So we plucked a couple of things here, just again as illustration. And again, please, if there's a school you're interested in, you just go to the website and see what they've got, what their admissions offices are saying. They probably have updating FAQs providing this information. So the SAT and ACT general, the general SAT, ACT for like BU, Boston University, Case Western, Tufts, Scripps, and Chapman, these are schools that are test optional already, okay? When you go to, let's see the next line, SAT subject test only, Harvard, MIT, Harvard, and Caltech, they are not test optional for the general. It's like we want the test. We want your general SAT, ACT, but we're flexible on the subject test. So we expect students who want to submit subjects will consider them, but if you don't have them, it's not a problem. Other schools want subject tests, simply you have to have them, okay? Then people are making some policy adjustments that we've heard of at this point. The University of Chicago, for instance, has not been like absolute. They haven't said, this is absolutely what we're going to do. What they're saying is we're going to consider special situations for individual students, which means essentially we don't yet want to let go of the SAT or ACT. We're not ready to let that go, But if we think it's a problem for the applicant, we will keep that in mind. So, that's where they are. Who knows where they will be in a month or next month? So that would be a school where I would want to keep watching to see how they're going to assess it. And then the UCs have eliminated SAT and ACT scores for the upcoming year. Now, keep that in mind. I think right now it's put out as this is temporary, which means the intention is to bring it back. So for those of you who are not rising seniors, just keep that in mind. That it's not like the UCs are like, forget these tests forever. No, they're basically saying right now, SAT, ACT general, we're not going to require that. They are also though optional in that you can submit them for consideration still.
Yes, because most of the audience from Bay Area, they really want to know more about UCs, and they're going to ask it for the GPA going to be more important than like last year, right?
Probably the GPA and who's it may even be activities. I mean yes. Right now, the application essays and these things have already been published, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing at certain schools, maybe not the UCs, where they start asking questions about what did you do during that time, So we have no idea how they might start assessing, because right now they're still trying to figure it out. And these admissions is admissions and administration is another thing. I mean, they're trying to figure out how to have campus open in August. So just so much is up in the air. And what I would say, if there's a school that you're particularly concerned about, just keep paying attention to the news and going back to their websites to check it out. And just basically plan to do everything that you need to do and not worry about it too much. There's nothing you can do right now about things being shut down. But what you can do is just look at the different schools that you care the most about and make sure that you have what they need.
Yes, because we cannot do some things due to this shadow stuff. Either any stuff that we can do, and we can how we can support for our applications.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about this is different, so we don't know, who knows, but think about this, all right? So let's talk about how you can support your application. And these are things that you could have been doing to support your application anyway. And what is now changed is it says online before everything, right? So what we're really encouraging students now is to stay engaged. Okay, so stay engaged with things that are happening at school. That's one thing academically. But in terms of things, if you were going to do summer activities, consider taking online summer courses. We'll talk a little bit more about specific places where you can do that. Online summer courses demonstrate to admissions that the student is not only interested in getting a good grade in the class, so it doesn't have to be something you're making up for a grade. It could simply be something that you never had a chance to study or that your school doesn't offer, and now you have the chance to explore it. Schools love to see students demonstrating independent curiosity and interest in different areas. So that can be an academic subject, that can be a creative subject, anything that you feel like you would be passionate about and want to learn more about. It's worth exploring through summer courses that can be taken online. There are also opportunities to do online research, either with guidance through particular programs. You can also do independent research and decide that you've decided that here's a topic that I want to build some idea around, and I'm going to blog about it, or I am going to create a website that breaks it down in some way for people. So things that you can do things with guidance or independently, but what you do want to have is some way of documenting that it occurred. I mean, you can write about it for sure, but ideally, if it's ideal to be able to document something that's occurred. There are online academic competitions and challenges; those are still happening. I have a student who is actually in an area. Who's a debate competitor, and was expecting the tournaments to be closed, but no, they're doing it online. They're having Zoom debates. So they learned last week, their coach was like, nope, we're still preparing. You thought you were done with that, but we're going to be competing on Zoom. So certain competitions and things are still happening, but there are also independent competitions that you might not have had time to do if you were still involved with everything at school. So those things are there. Of course, online internships and jobs, maybe even reach out to, there might even be local companies that are shut down and struggling to stay open, that maybe can't actually have some of the overhead of having all of these employees in the same way. And maybe they actually want high school intern, but say it's a small business. There might be somebody who would like, oh, you know what, I could really use a high school intern at this time. you can learn about the business, but we don't have the same ability that we had before to hire. So those, I mean, there are things there related to credit and pay and all of that that can be complicated. But the point is that still look for opportunities for interning and jobs for things that can be done remotely. Of course, online volunteer activities, not all volunteer work has to be done in person. I'll give an example of that in a moment or two, but ways that you can stay engaged in service of others. And then last point is just simply dive into something you love or do something new. You can do this at home. Maybe you wanted to build a particular kind of shed or build some sort of, I don't know, motor in your backyard with the, you know, the things that were in your garage and they've always been there, and you want to do that. You can actually write an essay about having built that thing. Maybe you wanted to repair, I mean, it could be anything. You wanted to study gardening, and all of a sudden, you know, the shopping situation made you more curious about a certain kind of gardening that you could do in short term. And so you can try that out and then write about it and tell people about it. So you don't always have to do things that are obvious or things that were already offered at school or things that somebody said, hey, you should do this. Just think about what you love and what you can do to kind of let your curiosity go deeper. That's something that could be, frankly, in many ways more personally rewarding than doing the should activities. And also in some ways comes off as a little bit more authentic to admissions when you basically said, this is what I spent my time doing. I was really passionate about it. I was curious about it. And no, it's not because everybody in my class did it. It's because I wanted to do it. And they're like, ah, this is interesting. Okay. Now, the last thing is that if COVID-19 has impacted the student and or the family significantly through illness, job loss, or lack of educational access, communicate this in the application. So I want to explain what I mean here is that for both adults and students alike, there is this sense of, well, we're sheltering in place. And if you all of a sudden have more time, some people actually have more time because they're staying home, right? So people are baking and cooking, and some people are like, now's the time to write your novel. Like there's a lot of like conversation about how productive we can all be because we're now not out running around in the world, right? So that's one type of pressure. There's also reality that is some people actually are dealing with people who are getting sick. Some people's parents may have lost a job or dealing with layoffs or cut hours, right? Some people might actually be in essential jobs. So they have a parent who is a doctor or a nurse who's now at the hospital all the time and can't even be in the household, right? So that can be a form of upheaval. And there are some people, as I mentioned earlier, who you can, let's say you have a sibling or not even a sibling, you have two parents who have to work remotely now, and there are two home computers, and you're supposed to go to school, and all of a sudden there isn't enough technology to have everybody running Zoom meetings all day, right? So we can't assume, and admissions offices are not assuming, that everybody can just translate school to this home productivity world, right? And just like get it all done. So what I want to say here is that if this applies to you, do not spend time feeling like, oh, I should be doing all of these things, okay? And even if just, let's say from a mental health and mental wellness point of view, you are finding that adjusting to the situation has taken its toll emotionally and it's harder to get things done. Or that could be happening in your household. You might have a parent who is having a hard time, right? All of these things could be happening. That's also taken into consideration. This is a very difficult, challenging situation, even for people who are not in the most impacted areas. So I would say take care of yourself and be aware of what you're doing with this time. Do not try to run for things just because you can support your application. If you really need to hold back because of illness, job loss, or lack of being able to do some of these activities, share that in your application. Let them know that. That in and of itself is a burden that you are carrying. And for some people, like I said, there are students who are now having to work more or having to do more household help for whatever reason, that things have changed for them. Those in and of themselves are activities that the university will want to know about. So here are just some online resources for your reference that you can consider. And this is not a comprehensive list. This is a handful of ones that are interesting that Harmony Plus is aware of, or that you might already be aware of, that are well vetted, that you can take a look at. But there are also ones that you can go beyond this. But the idea is that you can have learning programs. So just some things to reference. You have Pioneer Academics, and So that is actually online research. This is a well-respected and a selective program. It's college credit for high school students to do online research. So Pioneer Academics, say the student wants to do research, they can look into that. There's the Eureka program, which is a long-term program focused on encouraging, actually trying to close the gender parity. So encouraging girls, I think particularly in STEM. So Eureka has different programs oriented that way, but that's one there. The Center for Talented Youth, which is of course at Johns Hopkins, that's CTY, is like an old workhorse that everybody knows. It's been around for a really, really long time. I mean, back when I was a child, people were going to CTY. So that is there out of Johns Hopkins. They have courses, you have to apply to different things, but they have a whole range of subjects in all different areas. Harmony Plus project-based learning programs. Becky mentioned some of the things that they are associated with. Harmony Plus has a variety of different things. You also have academic competitions. So you have things like Kaggle, which is one that Becky also mentioned. There's I think it was the Kaggle Challenge. Kaggle has learning orientation towards data science. So they have micro courses in Python, micro courses in machine learning, intro to machine learning, things related to data science. Then you have the Knowledge Wharton High School, which is the KWHS, which is high school education related to business coming out of University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. You have the Congressional App Challenge, you have the Google Science Fair, and MIT Think. So these are things that you can take a look at just for reference here. You also don't have to always look into things that are completely academically competitive or selective or application-based. I'll just throw out a couple things. Cal Arts, California Arts, incredibly well-known California-based school for the arts, has a number of competitive and open courses in media and animation and design and studio art and things along those lines. That they've transformed their things, like have an all animation program. So there are a lot of, I mean, we could go on and on about all of the programs there are a ton. You can look at them, but also I want to say too that, you know, some students might say, well, we're still busy. Maybe the student says, I want to explore an area and I want to do something new. I don't know if my parents want to invest $1,000 or a few $1,000s in an online course right now. I want to just explore, what can I do? You can do something on Coursera. You can actually do something on Udemy even. I mean, like you can, you know, there's a student who I recently encouraged who is a musician who just as a challenge, I was like, you know what, you've been talking about songwriting and music. At this point, I just encourage you to go and look at some, you know, songwriting courses and go and write a song so that like the thing that you've been talking about actually exists. And so whether or not that becomes something that the student can run with and show to schools is something that remains to be seen in terms of timeout. I mean, in terms of in a couple of months out from now. But what we start doing is using almost the easy opportunities, low cost, easily accessible opportunities for a student to begin to explore their curiosity and try something new and develop a portfolio. You might just try something on Coursera, a random class that was free and fabulous and interesting, and be like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Now I want to figure out how I can sign up for a community college course online later in the summer, right? But sometimes you have to do these little things first to figure out what you know or what you like, and then go deeper. So I think these are all fabulous learning programs. I think competitive ones, selective ones matter. High investment ones are also really important. Longer term ones are great. And I want to encourage students, if you're not sure, try the easy to access, publicly available ones to adults, where you can just try a course out and see what it's like and see if you can go with it. There's so much information online in terms of online learning that you can do so much.
Yeah, thanks, Lynea, for sharing like lots of online stuff to the student, to like upcoming like applications. And would you please talk a little bit more about our like unique situations?
So this comes back to what I was saying before, that the schools are going to be considering unique situations in general. I feel like some of this I've already covered, so I'll go over it pretty briefly. That unique situations mean if illness impacts you, job loss impacts you, access to online education and your school impacts you, and then there's other ideas, gap years, if for whatever reason you've decided to take a gap year. So admissions offices, number one, are sensitive to COVID-19 impacts. That's the big picture, the whole point of what we're talking about today. Number two, don't worry and share in your application if you have been affected by illness, if the family situation has been impacted by a lost job, if the student has had to work or otherwise support parents, or the student can't get online. Okay, I've already said all of that. Don't worry about it. Don't get scared. Just talk about it. Do what you need to do. And one other bullet, if it's mentally taxing and people are having emotional difficulty, don't worry about that as well, that this is a traumatic and trying time. Think about ways to take care of yourself, okay? Now, on the flip side, if you do have stability and you do have the resources and you do have access, meaning that the shelter in place and shutdowns have not dramatically impacted your day-to-day life such that you can't actually get things done, and for some people, you actually have more time than you had before, then it's possible that where you go to school, that will be a commonplace thing, which means, again, if your peer group is able to get certain things done and you are similar to your peer group, you might want to continue being as engaged as they are, if that makes sense. So admissions offices will likely recognize if you have the capacity to get things done. Do not slack off because you think admissions is suddenly going to be easier. Okay, that's just not the way to go. They are going to be assessing levels of engagement. I was listening to specific admissions counselors, including the a VP of enrollment, I think from Cornell, talking specifically about this idea of, like, you know, we're taking a look at like what a student did with their time based on what they could have done, right? And so if somebody just decides to stop doing stuff because of the shutdown and just is taking their cues from their school, oh, they shut down, so I don't have to do this. That's not initiative. But if something shuts down and a student says, well, you know, I got up, I dusted myself off and I decided to try this, even if it was just personal exploration, that's looked upon as a student like staying engaged with the world. And then the last point is a little different. You know, some of you, I know, if you're a local student or a domestic student or family in the United States, you're probably very familiar with gap years. If you're overseas, you might not be as familiar with this. A gap year is when, before the pandemic, okay, this has always been the case. A gap year is when students graduate from high school and instead of applying to colleges, instead of going to college right after high school, they take a year to travel or to get a job, to intern, to learn something new, to work. Just they decide, or, you know, sometimes it's because the parents and or the student decide that the student needs a little bit more maturing before going to college, or maybe they went to a really competitive school and the student was very worn out and doesn't want to, wants a little bit of a break before going into some competitive college. A gap year is basically where the student takes a year. I would say 20 years ago, 10 years ago even, gap years were less favored. I don't know about by admissions. I wouldn't say that admissions didn't favor them. It's students and families didn't favor them socially. Like, it was kind of the sense of like, oh no, you got a gap year, will you ever get to college? So it involved a lot of fear. But over the last couple of years, it's become more commonplace. I think as high schools have become more intense and harder and competitive and more stressed out that young people have become, the idea of a gap year has become more appealing to more people. So some people actually do it. And you know what? When you go into college a year after everybody else, it's not the most devastating thing. Like before, it was like, oh my gosh, you stayed out a year. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be. So the point is that's become more common. Well, we are neither recommending that or discouraging that. We're just sharing this as information so that you're aware of it. What is happening, or what is anticipated to happen, is that more students may select a gap year because of the pandemic. And why that might be is that if a student really wanted their junior year grades and to have a really solid junior year, and they needed that second semester, for instance, and they don't feel that the grades that they have or their activities for the first semester of senior year are strong enough for the schools that they want to apply to, some people might decide, you know what, I'm going to go through all of senior year, get a complete profile for senior year and activities, and then I am going to apply the following fall, do a gap year, and then go to school after that. So those are just things that people are considering. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's still uncommon. We just want to let you know that, you know, if you're a family who's been thinking about a gap year, or, you know, it could even be also financial, that college is coming and the family has been impacted by coronavirus and they kind of think, well, we kind of need an extra year to save up tuition. You know, that might also be, or even maybe we want to wait a year before we send a student to such and such city to go to school for safety purposes. It's an option open to you, and it might become more common.
Yeah, thanks for Lynea's sharing, because we already have like around 6 minutes left. The student would like to listen some suggestions for the upcoming like applications.
Right. So here are just the strategy adjustments we're recommending for the best outcomes. Number one, stay engaged in academics and extracurricular activities. I've said it again, I will say it again, just stay engaged. Continue your test preparations for the SAT, ACT, the SAT subject test, and the AP. Whatever it is that you need to get done, continue with that. APs are almost over, so hopefully you've already done that. I really, really encourage students to create new activities related to your talents, interests, and values. Here are just some random specific examples. A student who's been involved in robotics creates online videos introducing middle schoolers to robotics. Just thinking, well, yeah, you know what? I'm a junior. I've been doing robotics for all of these years. Our tournament is canceled. Tournament's going to cancel. What is it? You know, I might say to the student, well, when did you start robotics? Oh, in 8th grade. You know, what do you wish you knew about it when you were in 6th or 7th grade? Oh, I thought, I wish I knew this, and I could have done this, and this would have been this, right? Okay, go and make some online videos and put them on YouTube about intro for middle schoolers, something that you already have. Making outreach calls to isolated seniors in the neighborhood. You can do a phone tree, things that's in service and that you might see as something that's already in need, but then you can turn it into a volunteer activity, but also be helping somebody. So something that you're connected with. Students launching an international online art or photography magazine. Normally when people are involved in their art and photography magazines, or let's say a poetry magazine for school, it's limited to who they go to school with. Well, now everybody's online. You know, maybe this is an opportunity to do the first, like, you know, I don't know, international forum for art and photography for high school students. It could be something along those lines. And say you actually are having a hard time and you really don't have the energy and you don't want to do all of these activities. Maybe you actually want to relax and take better care of yourself. And so instead you're going to learn to meditate and become more introspective. You take like the online course at Yale, the happiness course, which is a well-known sort of a course or something like that. And just actually sit there and say, well, let me take care of myself, but learn in the process. So then that note is, more is not always more in college admissions. Schools also value students who lean back and reflect rather than do. I already said that. To prove themselves, keep that in mind. Leaning back and chilling out sometimes is good as well. I do recommend working on your college essays and your college list over the summer. The essays, even though only 23% of schools on that chart as of like 2019 consider them, let's say, of considerable importance. Let's just keep in mind, most of them, like I think it was over 30%, thought they were of moderate importance, and I can guarantee you that top 25 schools or so is in that top chunk. So the more competitive the school and the more essays they have, if you're gunning for competitive schools, essays matter, period. That doesn't really become diminished. Now, stay connected to teachers who might recommendations. Your teachers should not just become faces on Zoom now. I really encourage you to email, to stay in contact, to be the student who doesn't just disappear and just turn in your stuff online and not really sort of engage. That student who writes to the teacher and says, hi, you know, I'm really interested in learning this. Could you give me some direction? Or, you know it's summertime, but I started taking this course. I have some questions. Would you mind explaining this concept to me? Those kinds of questions and interactions with teachers actually, make the teacher feel more valued, have them remember you, and recognize that you actually have a shared interest with something they're passionate about enough to be teaching it. So keep that in mind. When you're connecting with a teacher and saying, hey, I'm interested in this, you're saying to them, I actually kind of love something that you love to do. Most of your teachers are teaching it because they had a passion for the subject. So we encourage you to engage your teachers because they are going to help you on the other one when they're writing recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Lynea. Is there any like timeline for upcoming students?
So the last thing I have to say, we have more to say after that, but the last thing I have to say is that overview of the admissions timeline, that just big things that you should think of. Right now, we've got the AP tests. You should be starting your college lists about now, starting to brainstorm and prepare those essays and write the essays if you're ready, and then also doing SAT and ACT prep, even if you don't know when the test is coming. That's for right now and going into the summer. By early fall, your early applications will be due. There are really specific deadlines. You'll look that up when you get into that process, but expect to have chosen early action, early decision schools, of course, more college essay writing. By late fall, you will have UCs, University of Californians, and other big state schools due, for instance, the University of Texas, Austin. Those will be generally due around the UCs, 11/30, November 30th or December 1st. And there are just a handful of schools. Also, honors programs and some merit scholarship things have early deadlines for schools that are around the end of November, the beginning of December. Again, more college essays. And then as we move into winter, you can, of course, have most of your private and public school college applications are due. The general dates range. On average, they're around December 31st through early February. Some go into March, but that's what we start looking at, is that everything starts really running by December 31st. And then things trickle out and sort of wind down in early February. And so that's essentially all I have to say.
Yeah, I really appreciate for Lynya's like sharing about all the stuff we're gonna facing and how we can adjustment everything. And then after the stuff Lynya said, like how Harmony Plus can help the students, we have the future planning. And for our future planning, it's gonna have like college counseling, like high school's application, 4 years planning, summer programs, test prep, what I mentioned before, and internship, and also transfer services, and also the different academic programs, soft skill programs, and also the professor research programs. In our like future planning, we have the moonshot in our education. And what is the moonshot? It's like shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you will land away the stars. We always help students to aim like higher and shoot for the better results. And also we have the learning ecosystem. As I mentioned before, Harmony Plus is an official partnership with the top university like UC Berkeley, San Jose State, Stanford International Research Institute, and also we provide like customized services to different students and families. And also we have the Golden Triangle team. In the PowerPoint, you can see we have US coach, and Lynea is our like senior and star coach at Harmony Plus, already helps lots of students. And also we have education consultants work as a project management as a team to help students and family. And also we have peer mentors to help the students with their like emotional things to make them to do better, and also to give them like better environment in their like high pressure stuffs. And also we're working as a team and to serve a family. And also we have the transparent services system we call like Kanban system. We will gonna invite our students, our parents in our system, and to chat each other and to communicate each other friendly and make everything at the same page. And also one of our parents describe us, I have ever met an education company did everything with loves. Even though this parents did not be our future planning like guest yet, but just try our like academic program and give us this kind of like highly feedback. And also this is like our Kanban system. We will have the student have their own Kanban. We will edit their basic information, out their transcript, what they did before for their outside activities, extracurriculums. And also we can like created the Kanban to the parents and students and coach and teacher. As I mentioned before, like everyone have to be in the same page, and also the coach and also the coach can have the meetings with the students. The coach will taking the notes, and also we can discuss under this Kanban. As you can see, we will create the to-do list for the students. As they just finished, they can click on I finished. If it not, and the calendars and the system gonna remind them. And also we can have the chat with our like educational consultant as our coach after the Kanban. And also we can have the group chat. You can see we have a lot of like people inside. They're like teachers and educational consultants, students, and parents. We will like communicate frequently and make everything at the same page, and to working as a team to help our students. Yeah, and this is all the feedback from the students. What I want to mention is here, the UC Davis one. This is like one of the students, Coach Lynea coach for this year. And the student get UC Davis really beyond his expectation. And also at first, he did the wait list for the UC Davis. And he said, I'm gonna give up for that. But everyone is to encourage him, like coach, like consultant, and our CEO, and the peer leaders, and the consultant, like we're trying our best to engage him. Said, you have to do that. If you do that, we will have chance. And then finally we got the results. So during the future planning, as not only to help the student to get their like expectation offers, but also to develop their like core competencies during the future planning services. Yes. And if you have any questions, you want to know more about our future planning, please contact us. Like we will be with you shortly, because we have lots of like out in China. I have to say like goodbye in Chinese. If you're if you would ask Lynea some questions, please leave in the Zoom. We can chat later. 我们每次的微课堂分享都不是标准答案，孩子的成长中也没有标准答案。我们试图用每个故事、每个案例，为大家带来更加广阔的视野、更加客观的认识、更加清楚的了解在美学习、工作、生活、发展等这件事情。欢迎大家再次来参与我们的微课堂，也诚邀您可以把我们的活动传播给更多的亲朋好友。我们期待用分享传播更多在美的正见，带领更多家庭规避误区。那今天的微课堂就到这里了，谢谢您的关注与参与，我们下期再见。